Hi guys, in this video we're going to cover the basics of sequence patterns. So a sequence pattern is just a pattern made up by numbers. So here I have a sequence and it's just a changing number of dots for every pattern in the sequence. So I have pattern 1 here, pattern 2 here, pattern 3 here, pattern 4 here. And in each of those patterns I've got 3 dots, then 5 dots, then 7 dots, and then 9 dots. And we're going to use tables and equations and graphs to show and describe these patterns. So I'm going to start by taking what I've done here and I'm actually going to write it into a table. Because you can see here I've kind of got one already. I have my pattern number and I have my number of dots. So I'm going to make a table, and on one side I'm going to have my pattern number. I'm going to call it N, and on my other side I'll have my number of dots. I call it D. And then for pattern number 1 I have 3 dots. Pattern number 2 I have 5 dots. Pattern number 3 I have 7 dots, and pattern number 4 I have 9 dots. Now, one thing that we need to be able to describe is the change that's happening between each pattern. What's happening every time we get to a new pattern? And if we go from 3 to 5, and then 5 to 7, and 7 to 9, we can see that we are going up in 2s every time. So what's happening here is that we're adding on 2 every time we get a new pattern. So I'm going to just write down here that I have 2 for every new pattern number N. Okay, 2N. Now you should remember from algebra that a number right next to a letter is kind of like a multiplication. We have 2 times N. Now that's not quite right for our pattern here, because if I look at my pattern number 2 for instance, 2 times pattern number 2, 2 times 2 is 4, but I've got 5 dots. And here, pattern number 3, well 2 times 3 is 6, but I have 7 dots. So we are missing something. And what we're missing is actually a start. We have how much it's changing, but we also need to be able to describe where our pattern starts. And our pattern actually starts when our first pattern is 0. So for this case, it is when N is 0. So if I go back 1, I have an N of 0. And you can see I have 1 dot. If we go from 3, we go back 2. That's like taking away 2. And I end up with 1 dot. And so I start with 1. So I'm going to write that plus 1 here. So now I'm just going to rewrite this as an equation. We have my number of dots is equal to 2 times my pattern number plus 1. This 2 is how much it's changing, and this 1 is where I start. So let's see if this equation here represents what's going on with my pattern. Let's take pattern number 2. If it's pattern number 2, I can replace my N, my pattern number, with the actual pattern number itself. So I can rewrite this as my number of dots is equal to 2 times, because remember this means times, my pattern number 2 plus 1. Well, 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5. So for pattern number 2, I should have 5 dots. And that's what I have. Let's check pattern number 4. So my number of dots should be 2 times my pattern number 4 plus 1. Well, 2 times 4 is 8. 8 plus 1 is 9, and that's true. I have 9 dots. And so we can represent our pattern with a table. We can also represent our pattern with an equation. Later on, I'll also show you how to take this information, either the table or the equation, and represent our pattern on a graph.